There is something happening inside some brains right now, not dramatically, not painfully, no warning light, no obvious sign, quietly, silently, over years, a process that researchers now know begins, in most cases, somewhere between 15 and 20 years before the first memory symptom appears. Alzheimer's disease actually starts in the brain decades before you have any symptoms. Read that again. Decades before you notice anything wrong, which means that the seniors watching this video, who are in their early 60s, the window when the most powerful protective actions are available, may already be in the early stages of this process without any idea. And the seniors in their 70s who feel sharp and clear may have unknowingly been doing the right things for years, or may have been unknowingly accelerating a process they did not know was happening. Today we are going to tell you what that process is. In plain words, we are going to tell you what researchers have found about who it happens to faster and why, and we are going to tell you the specific things, backed by the strongest available evidence, that genuinely slow it down, not vague wellness advice, specific, targeted, evidence-based, because the window where these things matter most, the window where the science says intervention is most effective, is not after the memory problems start, it is now, while the brain still has its full reserve, while the damage has not yet crossed the threshold where it becomes obvious. Stay until the end. Because the last thing we share is the one that the research calls the single most powerful intervention for protecting the aging brain. And it is not a supplement, it is not a medication, it is something completely free that every senior has access to right now. Welcome back. Let us start with what is actually happening in the brain. The most common form of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, involves two main processes. The first is the accumulation of a protein called amyloid beta into plaques between brain cells. The second is the formation of tangles of another protein called tau inside brain cells. Together, these plaques and tangles disrupt communication between brain cells. They trigger an inflammatory response. They damage and eventually kill the neurons affected. Now here's the critical thing. These processes begin decades before the first symptom appears. Brain scans using specialist imaging can detect amyloid plaques in people who are cognitively completely normal, performing perfectly on memory tests, showing no signs of any problem whatsoever. The plaques are there, building, accumulating, silently. And during this silent phase, this long window before symptoms, the brain does something remarkable. It compensates. The brain has enormous reserve capacity. When some neurons are damaged or killed, other neurons reroute their connections. The brain finds alternative pathways. It maintains function through redundancy and flexibility. This compensation is why symptoms do not appear for so long. The brain is quietly working harder and harder to maintain the same level of performance as the damage accumulates beneath the surface. Early diagnosis can help folks potentially get access to treatments that can help slow the progression of certain forms of dementia. But here is the equally important flip side. The size of the brain's compensatory reserve, how much capacity it has available to compensate, is largely determined by what has happened to the brain over the preceding decades. The habits, the choices, the lifestyle, the health management. A brain with abundant reserve compensates longer, reaches the symptom threshold later, or possibly never. A brain with depleted reserve reaches that threshold sooner. Building and protecting that reserve is where the science of dementia prevention lives, and it is where we are going to spend the rest of this video. The first thing the research identifies: sleep. New sleep behaviors may be a sign of dementia according to experts, but the relationship between sleep and dementia runs much deeper than this. During sleep, specifically during the deep slow-wave sleep stages, the brain activates its glymphatic system. Think of the glymphatic system as the brain's overnight cleaning crew. During deep sleep, cerebrospinal fluid pulses through the spaces between brain cells, flushing out metabolic waste products that have accumulated during the day. One of the waste products it flushes out is amyloid beta, the protein that accumulates into the plaques of Alzheimer's disease. During a good night of deep sleep, the brain clears a significant proportion of the amyloid that built up during waking hours. The cleaning crew does its job. The brain wakes up with lower amyloid burden than when it went to sleep. During a poor night of broken, shallow sleep, the kind so many seniors experience, this clearance is dramatically reduced. The amyloid that built up during the day is not fully cleared. It accumulates overnight rather than being removed. Night after night, year after year. The accumulation compounds. Research has found that even one night of sleep deprivation produces a measurable increase in amyloid levels in the brain. and that individuals with chronic poor sleep in midlife and early older age have significantly higher rates of subsequent Alzheimer's diagnosis than those who sleep well. This is not simply correlation. There is a direct biological mechanism. Poor sleep reduces amyloid clearance. Reduced clearance increases amyloid burden. Increased amyloid burden accelerates the pathological process. Protecting sleep quality, particularly the deep, slow-wave sleep stages that decline naturally with age, is one of the most direct and most important interventions for brain protection available to seniors. What specifically helps deep sleep? Consistent sleep and wake times every day, including weekends. A cool bedroom. No alcohol, which reduces deep sleep stages even in moderate amounts. No screens for at least 30 minutes before bed. And addressing the medical causes of poor sleep, sleep apnea, pain, bladder issues, that interrupt the continuity of sleep. Sleep apnea in particular deserves mention. It causes repeated oxygen deprivation throughout the night, it fragments sleep constantly, and it is consistently associated with significantly accelerated cognitive decline and higher dementia risk. If you snore loudly, wake frequently, feel unrefreshed regardless of how many hours you sleep, please ask your doctor about a sleep apnea assessment. It is treatable, and treating it produces measurable improvements in cognitive performance. The second thing the research identifies: exercise. The evidence for physical exercise as a brain protective intervention is the most consistent in the entire dementia prevention literature. Multiple large studies across different countries and different populations have found that regular moderate physical activity is associated with significantly reduced dementia risk. The effect is not small. In some analyses, adults who exercise regularly have 30 to 40% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's than sedentary adults. The mechanisms are multiple. Exercise increases cerebral blood flow. The brain receives more oxygen and more nutrient delivery. Exercise stimulates the production of a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF is sometimes called the brain's fertilizer. It supports the survival of existing neurons, stimulates the growth of new neurons, and supports the formation of new neural connections. Higher BDNF is associated with larger hippocampal volume, the hippocampus being the brain region most critical for memory and the region most damaged in early Alzheimer's. Exercise reduces the chronic systemic inflammation that drives neuroinflammation. It improves insulin sensitivity, which reduces the glucose metabolism impairments associated with Alzheimer's pathology, and it reduces cardiovascular risk, keeping the blood vessels supplying the brain healthy and reducing the microvessel damage that contributes to vascular dementia. The dose that appears in the research as most protective: 150 minutes per week of moderate aerobic activity, walking fast enough that you could hold a conversation but would not want to sing. 5 days of 30 minutes, or 6 days of 25 minutes, that is all. Resistance exercise, the strength movements we discuss regularly on this channel, adds further benefit through its effects on metabolic health and its independent effects on BDNF production. The message is not that you need to run marathons, it is that consistent moderate movement, every single week, produces genuine, measurable, biologically real protection for the aging brain. The third thing the research identifies: cardiovascular risk management. This one is perhaps the most clinically important and the most commonly underappreciated. The blood vessels that supply the brain, the entire vascular network from the large carotid arteries to the microscopic capillaries within the brain tissue, are as critical to cognitive health as the neurons themselves. A neuron that loses its blood supply dies. High blood pressure is the single most powerful modifiable risk factor for dementia that has been identified in the research, not simply for vascular dementia, the type caused directly by blood vessel damage in the brain, but for Alzheimer's disease as well. Research has consistently found that long-standing, inadequately treated high blood pressure in midlife significantly increases Alzheimer's risk in later decades. The mechanism is partly through direct vascular damage. The same pressure that damages vessels throughout the body damages the delicate capillaries of the brain, and partly through indirect effects on amyloid clearance. Hypertension impairs the glymphatic clearance system, reducing the brain's ability to remove amyloid overnight. Diabetes and insulin resistance accelerate brain aging through multiple mechanisms. Elevated blood sugar damages small blood vessels. It impairs neuronal energy metabolism. Neurons use glucose, and when glucose regulation is disrupted, their function suffers. And advanced glycation end products, compounds formed when sugar chemically attaches to proteins, damage brain tissue directly. High cholesterol, specifically high LDL particle burden, accelerates the atherosclerotic process that reduces cerebral blood flow. Managing these three conditions, blood pressure, blood sugar, and cholesterol, aggressively, and consistently is one of the highest leverage interventions available for brain protection, not as a side effect of heart health, as a primary strategy for cognitive protection. If your blood pressure is not at target, if your HbA1c is not at target, if your LDL is not at target, your brain is accumulating a risk burden that your current medication or lifestyle plan is not fully addressing. This conversation with your doctor, specifically about the cognitive implications of cardiovascular risk factor management, is worth having at your next appointment. The fourth thing the research identifies: social and intellectual engagement. By understanding the signs of the disease and getting an early diagnosis, individuals and caretakers can better plan and prepare for the future. But understanding what protects the brain before symptoms appear matters equally. The concept of cognitive reserve describes the brain's resilience, its ability to tolerate damage and continue functioning. And the factors that build cognitive reserve are largely those that involve sustained mental and social engagement over a lifetime: education, occupational complexity, bilingualism, musical training, regular reading and learning, social engagement. Research has found that individuals with higher cognitive reserve, regardless of their level of brain pathology, show symptoms later. They tolerate more amyloid burden, more vascular damage, more neuronal loss before the threshold of clinical impairment is crossed. They are not protected from the pathology. They have more reserve to compensate for it. And critically, the building of cognitive reserve does not stop in midlife. Adults who engage in new learning, complex social activities, and mentally stimulating pursuits in their 60s and 70s continue building reserve into the period when it matters most. Learning a new skill, a language, an instrument, a new subject, a new game. These are not just pleasant activities. They are, in the context of the brain protection evidence, legitimate medical interventions. Social connection, genuine reciprocal social engagement, is among the most powerful of all. The cognitive demands of real human conversation, of reading social situations, of navigating complex relationships, activate more of the brain simultaneously than almost any other activity. And isolation, as we have discussed extensively on this channel, drives the inflammation and stress hormone elevation that accelerates brain aging. The fifth thing, and the most powerful single intervention the research has identified: it is not a drug, it is not a supplement, it is not a device, it is purpose. Research from the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center in Chicago followed over 900 older adults for 7 years, measuring their sense of purpose in life, how much they felt their life had meaning and direction, alongside cognitive outcomes. The finding was striking. Adults with high purpose in life had significantly lower rates of Alzheimer's disease and mild cognitive impairment. Even after controlling for depression, social activity, physical health, and other potential confounders, the effect of purpose on cognitive outcomes remained independently significant. A subsequent analysis found that purpose in life was associated with better preserved cognitive function even among adults whose brains showed significant amyloid pathology post-mortem. The pathology was there. The cognitive reserve was sufficient to compensate for it, and purpose, with its downstream effects on stress hormones, inflammation, sleep quality, motivation to maintain health behaviors, and the neurological activation associated with goal-directed behavior, appears to be a genuine driver of that reserve. Purpose is not a soft concept. It is a measurable, biologically active state that the brain responds to in ways that protect it. Finding or maintaining a sense of purpose, something that gives the morning meaning, something that matters to someone else, something that makes the next day worth showing up for, is the single most integrating intervention in the brain health literature. Because it drives all the others, people with purpose exercise more consistently, sleep better, maintain social connections more actively, seek and receive medical care more proactively. Purpose is the upstream variable that makes all the downstream variables more likely to be in place. Before we finish, the reassurance. While dementia can present in many different ways, there are things you can do to reduce your risk or slow the progression. Not everything, not certainly, but significantly, meaningfully, in ways that research consistently confirms are real. You cannot choose your genetics. You cannot undo the past decades. You cannot guarantee an outcome. But the window where these interventions have their greatest impact is not after the memory problems appear. It is during the long silent phase. The phase that lasts 15 to 20 years before symptoms. The phase that many seniors watching this right now are in. Sleep deeply. Move your body every single week. Manage your blood pressure and blood sugar and cholesterol with your doctor as priorities. Keep learning something new. Stay genuinely connected to people. And find something that makes tomorrow matter. These are not the only things that determine whether dementia develops, but they are the things most within your control. And the research says clearly that for the people who do them consistently, the brain ages better, the reserve builds stronger, and the threshold of impairment arrives later. Later by years, possibly by decades. That is worth something. That is worth everything. Today we covered what the brain is doing silently right now, years before symptoms appear, and the 5 most evidence-supported interventions for protecting it: sleep and the glymphatic clearance system, exercise and BDNF, cardiovascular risk management, cognitive and social engagement, and purpose. Share this video today, not with someone who already has memory problems. Share it with someone who is sharp right now, someone who is in their 60s and feels fine, someone who has no idea that right now, today, is when these things matter most. That person is the one this video was made for. Subscribe for a new honest, simple health video every week. Take care of that extraordinary brain. We will see you next time.